Okay. We're presenting to you just brief announcements. That was fantastic. I mean, all the panelists, 4 of them, probably let's give them one big round of applause before we go to the podium. Okay. Ang una pong announcement, mayroong reading materials at information kit. Professor Grace has brought with her a special edition of the News Zamboanga Standoff magazine. So kung pwede po kuha kayo dun sa table at a lot of the publications of the Asian Center, relevant and very, very current now, our discussion. And also, we are flashing the signature petition, the sign-on campaign that has now drawn 200 civil society and non-government organizations as signatories seeking for humanitarian ceasefire and dialogue in Zamboanga. Kung pwede po, kayo ay pumirma rin. Kung gusto ninyo, ang website o URL link po ay iid.manila@gmail.com. So, ipa-flash po nila, ito po yung petition, and if you would please consider, sign on, speak out, call for humanitarian ceasefire and dialogue in Zamboanga, and urge the President and all parties to keep the guns silent so that we can deal with the very grave humanitarian relief and rehabilitation efforts. So, meron din po materials from the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process na nandun din po sa likod. Okay, game na tayo. Open forum po tayo. Maraming mga tanong siguro. What we can do is please request, come to the microphone, state your name and your organization so that our panelists could actually start responding to you. And please direct your questions to specific panel members. Ganun po yung inyong nais. First questions? Yes, please. Come forward. Pwede rin pong quick and sweet and short.
Ako po si Sani Melencio from the Partido de Las Namasa. Hindi ko po inabot yung unang parte, but I think this question, medyo nabanggit na ni Professor Wadi, but I think this is directed to the OPAP representative, the peace process representative. Kasi before this, itong forum na ito, I was able to meet Dr. Amin. So nakuha ko po yung, and unfortunately, isa matapunta ngayon dito to speak about yung sa MNLF side. Pero nakuha ko po yung letter na galing kay DFA Secretary Albert Rosario, na binigay po sa amin ni Dr. Amin. And it was 2 letters, February 30 pa, this year, pagkatapos may March 21 letter, asking yung OIC Peace, Southern Peace, Philippines, the OIC, yung counterpart niya doon sa Indonesia na tapusin na yung tripartite review process. And I think nangyari ito na maaga pa, January pa. So for us, this could have been ang bagay na nakapag-ignite nitong war situation sa Zamboanga. And Professor Wadi also explained kung ano yung implication niyan. So I want to know kung ano po ang kinalaman ni Secretary Del Rosario o yung relationship ni Secretary Del Rosario with the peace process. Sino po ang nasusunod? Kasi it seems, yung sulat na yun ay pinapatigil na yung kay Ms. Wari. Sinasabi, tapos na yung mga question ni Ms. Wari dahil sa na-address na yan ng framework agreement. So, I think it has to be explained yung role at ano ba talaga ang policy ng gobyerno, sino ba ang nagsasalita, and then, how do we address the situation now? Are we still going to pursue military solutions sa problem na yan, or are we going to open talks with Professor MNLF leader Ms. Wadi? Yun lang po kasi concern kami kasi nabuksan ang era yan, hindi pa tapos at kailangan po natin tapusin yan, and that is the role of the government.
Okay, so 2-part question kay siguro kay Sec Chito. First part, who's in charge here? Ano yung role ni Secretary Del Rosario para may iba-ibang sanga-sangang initiatives? From January, this could have been actually avoided. And the second part, ano mo ba talaga ba yung status ngayon? We abandon military.
I'm just wondering whether we should take several questions.
Okay. Are there people with similar questions? I think that's top of mind sa mga tao. Sino ang in charge dito? Ano talaga yung strategy talaga or combination of initiatives that government is doing? Meron pa po bang related questions? Yeah, we can take maybe 3 in a series pa of questions so the panelists could respond.
Wala.
Wala. Okay, go quick answer.
Kanina sa presentation ko, I did refer to 2 note verbals written by Secretary de Rosario to the chairperson of the OIC Peace Committee on Southern Philippines. The note verbals are dated 30th January 2013 and 21st March 2013. And the principal content of the note verbal was a request to the PCSP to consider the closure or completion of the tripartite review process. And the purpose was to set a meeting for the tripartite review because this year there had been no meeting yet. The last meeting was held in Bandung in March of 2012. So the last tripartite review process had met in Bandung of 2012. So by January of 2013, we had requested to table on the agenda the completion of the tripartite review. As I said in my discussion, maybe that this is where there is misapprehension or misassessment of what that meant. What we were saying was that after 7 years and the exhaustion of all the issues in the review process, it was time to finish a review because it can't continue on. Okay. But there was no intention to close any engagement with the MNLF as such. It's also possible that the request to terminate the review had been perceived by some segments or understood by some segments as terminating the final peace agreement itself. No? And so our point is that was not the intention. The fact that we terminate the review does not mean we terminate the final peace agreement. Yes, ma'am.
Yusek, ang tanong ko yan, ano yung papel ni Secretary de Rosario and how does it relate to the OPAC?
Of course. I am needed to clarify what he was referring to first, so we're talking about the same thing. Now, the reason it was Secretary de Rosario is because it was a letter to the OIC. The OIC is an international organization. And we, of course, need to course through our communications and correspondences through proper channels. The Philippines is not a member of the OIC. The MNLF is an observer in the OIC. It is an intergovernmental body, and so the Philippine Foreign Affairs Office will have to be the one that corresponds to the OIC. But the note verbals themselves had actually been prepared in consultation within government. And so the position about requesting to terminate and to table that agenda in the next OIC PCSP meeting had been discussed at the highest levels, including OPAC. In fact, when we had met with the chair of the PCSP on September 5, about 11 days before the meeting that was supposed to be scheduled in Indonesia, we sat down at the OPAC offices with Ambassador Clay, who will chair the PCSP meeting. We had again reaffirmed our request to table on the agenda the completion of the review. And we were informed at that meeting that the OIC itself met in Istanbul 2 weeks earlier. And in that Istanbul meeting, they had actually discussed the note verbal from Secretary de Rosario, and there was a debate whether that was possible. And at the end of it, they told us that since they will, how do I put it? Of course, it would be discussed at Yogyakarta, but basically they said the OIC cannot prevent the Philippine government from pursuing its intention to complete the review. So that was the message they gave us, that they had met in Istanbul, and that when we meet in Yogyakarta, the OIC will not be in a position to prevent us from taking that position to complete. That was when we had tabled and reassured the OIC at that September 5 meeting that even if we complete the review, the intention is not to terminate whatever engagements had already been established and in fact potentially expand areas of engagement with the MNLF and other stakeholders in the peace process, but outside the review process. That was where it was supposed to go. Now, the issues here that were tabled, I think are all taken. Julkipli had highlighted the psychology of Lord. And I think, when you talk about psychology, these are matters in the mind and in the spirit. Often facts, events, on the ground will not be able to fully comprehend what people are thinking. And I think that's what happened here. There was a misassessment or misapprehension of what was tabled on the agenda of the PCSP. And I think the timing is telling. You're about to meet in Jogja, and then 1 week before you launch a siege. Why is that? So anyway, that is my reply to the facts about the note verbal. So it refers to the review. It does not refer to the termination of the FPA itself. The second question is very important. As I said earlier also, we are committed to the privacy of the peace process, and we are prepared to table all possibilities. But you cannot, of course, resume engagement, dialogue, conversations, negotiations when there is a crisis situation, a security problem. You cannot negotiate with someone who has his gun pointed at you. That's why we need to resolve the events unfolding in Zamboanga and address those issues at the table. So we need to move the process away from a conflict situation to negotiation. And of course, there are mechanisms in place on the ground. You have the Crisis Management Committee, and certainly civil society, stakeholders, the people in Zamboanga, the NGOs who are signing this petition, all of those should be taken into account to find a workable solution. In yesterday's forum, the concern that was coming out was about turning Ustad Malik into a martyr. Yeah. So even in yesterday's forum, there were concerns about preventing bloodshed. The government is committed to that as well. If we can find a peaceful solution to the situation, then let's explore that. But of course, government is committed to protecting the people of Zamboanga and containing the situation so that it doesn't spread further. The OPA is not on top of that. We are on top of the aspects involved in this issue when it is at negotiation mode. But when it is crisis management and addressing the immediate violence, our only role is to provide the information as they stand. So the points raised by the panel and by this discussion should be all taken and provided as feedback to those who will make the decisions ultimately.
Okay, would the panelists like to weigh in on the question? I think one of the things top of mind of many people would be, what would be the necessary final steps or the necessary steps that we can do by way of correcting, improving, or enhancing the efforts to actually settle or deal with the Zamboanga crisis? Saan po ba? Yes, Professor Chu.
Let me go back to the earlier questions and I will connect with
That's right.
First, the letter. Of course, I don't want to add fuel into the fire. But in my view, that was like an attempt to do a double kill. In the negotiation, there is a kind of an attempt to sort of isolate this one. And that was, I think, felt by Ms. Wadi himself because of the attempt to prop up other factions. The other is an attempt by the government to, in fact, even request the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to change the MNLF with its observer status to make the representation broader. In other words, in the letter I read that the Philippine government would like to remove the MNLF in the OIC, especially in terms of status. That is why these are actually the triggers. This attempt to do some kind of a double kill that led Eduardo C to convince himself that the government is like stabbing him at his back. But these things will actually be discussed in the negotiation. Why go to the OIC without even informing Ms. Wadi himself in the negotiation table of the acts or action, future actions of the government? Now, let me go into your concerns now. When the government and the MNLF already agreed with the 42 consensus points, I think it was fine at that time. But accordingly, Ms. Wadi proposed three things: the wealth sharing, the provisional government, then the deficit. Now, my concern is, why sort of be intimidated with the proposal of wealth sharing when it is even discussed in the annex with the Moro Islamic Federation Fund? On the provisional government, why sort of be intimidated with the proposals of provisional government proposal to Ms. Wadi, when the framework agreement is actually exploring ways on how to put up the Bangsamoro political entity by 2016? Why not allow the conversation, or in fact facilitate the conversation, so that somehow the Moro National Liberation Front will feel that it is part in the crafting of any kind of government, call it political entity, call it provisional government? Why halt the process when in fact that's the way, in fact, to do it? So that the MNLF will be its part of the process, and therefore it will have no reason to feel that it is being missed out. By imposing some legalism, by saying that the 1996 agreement was already finished, it was already a final agreement, I think the government misread the fact that the 1996 peace agreement was like a partnership between President Ramos and Nur Miswari, so such that agreement was doing well during Ramos's time, but it really crumbled. The whole thing collapsed like house of cards because there is no continuity of policy adopted by previous administrations. So that should have been taken into account, so that legalism would not reign. Creativity would rather be maximized and therefore facilitating the conversation between the two fronts. But I could understand the psychology because I think the government also felt some degree of comfortability or masyado siyang kampante. Why should we take you seriously when we are already, confident that we're doing well with the MLF? If you will not join the bus, then the bus will go on. That is, in my view, a false psychology that also happened in this panel. So, this should not have been averted. This standoff would have been averted when that conversation was facilitated and the government did not put any cap into the negotiation with the multinational election.
Okay. Professor Ed, okay. Kuha muna tayo mga questions in a series. Yes, I see someone there standing. Yes, sir. Please come forward. Name and organization, please.
Good morning. I'm Melo Acuña from China Radio International. Just 2 points. How far has the panel gone into finding out who Xavier Daniels is? What's his identity? And in as much as the psychology of Nur Biswali was mentioned, would anybody in the panel venture to tell us the psychology of President Aquino, being the commander-in-chief, having stayed in Zamboanga for some time?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Quick questions and quick answers. Who is Xavier Daniels? Did the government ever find out kung sino siyang tao yung nag-misrepresent na on behalf of the United Nations? And then, the psychology of President Pinoy as commander-in-chief and person supervising the operations in Zamboanga for over a week.
Some people in the audience are also quite aware of this psychology, so you could probably help us
Okay, any
make the
volunteers?
assessment of this psychology. Of course, we have our own perspective, but I don't know if these are quite important because I think this deals with the policy and things happening. There was a mention of the guy, the United Nations,
Xavier Daniels.
yes, David Xavier. I think partly Prof. Rebollos already underlined the role of Daniel Xavier in time in terms of sort of some kind of injecting pressures on the young eminent leaders. We have heard, in fact, I heard many media reports about the live research about his identity. And the UN representative in Manila said that he is indeed it has no connection with the United Nations. In other words, if this is the case, that indeed the certain Savior sorts of, how do you call that, entice or pressured the eminent, provided some kind of false hope or promise, then even in this regard, the eminent would look like a victim. Now, who is about Savior? Remember when he was, according to his roaming around below, he was accompanied by some US soldiers. When he was free to go around the town, talk with the eminent and other critical personalities in the town. Who is handling Savior? And here, I think even stayed for quite a long time with doing this work before this time. Now, regarding the psychology on President Aquino, he probably has his own psychology, but you have to also consider the psychologies of other people around him.
Okay.
So, I think this all adds up into the kind of an image of a state, and the 2016 kind of poke points thing. We will just speculate on this question. Let's allow psychologists to really dig deeper and assess how psychology impact in the handling of this time.
Secretary Chito. Did you ever find out who Xavier Daniels is? Or did the government investigate at all?
Well, we did make inquiries with the UN because the reports from the press, etc., was that there's this person from the UN who was encouraging or egging the MNLF to declare independence and all of that. But when we coordinated with the resident coordinator of the UN, they denied that there was such a person who had any relationship with the UN. So as far as the government was concerned, we were clarifying his status with the UN itself. The UN did not know of or where that person came from.
But it's point of fact that he was there. And
well, what we were receiving was that Mr. Miswari and other people in their group were in close communication with this person. But as far as the UN is concerned, again, this is a misperception or misassessment. They probably believed that they were being encouraged and urged by the UN when in fact the UN had no relationship with this person.
In that instance, would you think the MNLF was also a victim of false claims?
I'm not sure if victim is the proper phrase we should use because, again, we deal with the MNLF as a former rebel group that signed the peace agreement. Both parties to the agreement must comply with the purpose of the peace agreement, which is of course to ultimately end the armed conflict and address the long-standing issues of everything that Ed talked about, in a manner other than by resort to violence. And it's unfortunate that there are actors, independent actors or other actors that are taking advantage and providing misinformation that could lead, as it has eventually led to violence on the ground.
Okay, if we will ask Professor Grace if it's okay. The question earlier was, so if there was discussion about the psychology of Ms. Wadi or the backstory of what happened before Zamboanga, do you have some inputs on the psychology of the Commander-in-Chief or President Pinoy? And what was the situation really on ground from where you were in Zamboanga? Was there why take the military option? At what point was that necessary?
I would like to go further back to the previous questions about the non-verbal.
Okay.
Because Mr. Miswari keeps talking about this as a basis for his action. You said Joe Lorena came there to say that there's no termination of the tripartite engagement, but a termination of the tripartite review. Ang issue ko is ano ba ang protocol dito para magsabi na tapos na yan? Kasi mukhang unilateral ba sa gobyerno? Nag-desisyon ba sila na kinukonsulta din yung MNLF kung kontento na sila sa proseso ng review? Kasi sinasabi si Commander Mali much later na yung status ng regional security force, etc. So what we're saying is, mukhang hindi pa tapos sa kanila yung review, tapos na, tinapos na, sinabihan na lang sila. So, na-interpret na mukhang cut na. Okay. Ang sa akin naman, kung cut siya, bakit pa sila nagkikipagsangguni sa pop-up, sa gobyerno, para dun sa mga series of meetings na gagawin sa Indonesia, talagang cut na siya. Dun sa part ng action ng military, okay, the scenario was katakot-takot na intelligence na yan, ano? And if it would have been a way of nipping it in the bud, mag-usap-usap muna na hindi muna pumasok sa isang military action kahit calibrated kasi ano na yan, patayan na yan, no? And so, what we were saying is, the escalation from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, hanggang sa military action na yan, should have been judicious ba at well-studied sapagkat hindi na walang turning back ngayon. The military option has gained momentum. And even if you were to say na, okay, balik tayo kung sa hindi naman mag-usap, tapos, anticlimactic na. But, as these things are going on, saan tayo pa rin pwede pumwesto so that civil society will still be able to bridge gaps that may not have been bridged before, gone to the level of willing na pasukin yung area ni Commander Mali. So that with this tremendous amount of social capital, paano natin ilinya yung mga possibilities para pwede natin magamit lahat yan to optimize the situation ng engagement and to minimize the crisis. As it stands even now, ang nanggagaling na istorya ay may 70 na nasama ni Ustad Shumahit ngayon. But at this point, we hope it's not a no retreat, no surrender kind of thing na pwede pang mag-usap. That is why, still, even from yesterday, sino ba ang pwedeng makipag-usap sa presidente para magdeklara ng isang unilateral ceasefire? So, kasi what are the scenarios? Parang sabil, cultural. When you move off to the finish for a cause, ay si Sir Wadi ang mas makaka-ano siya. Oo. Parang sabil. Mangyayari nito, mamamartir yan. Titingnan na bayani. Kung hindi sa side ng Kristiyano, sa side ng Muslim. At ano ang magiging sympathy actions pag ganyan ang tingin? So what we're saying now is there a way we're able to stop that and to stop the military option, bring the dogs in and see what can be maximized in Sagat?
But is there a government mechanism to hear out? Let's say if it ever comes into as a distinct possibility.
In fairness to Secretary Lee, she's really been wondering about the place of everybody in all these things, and she's been asking involvement ng civil society, involvement ng Muslim Christian leaders, involvement ng lahat dito. Siguro it's a matter for whoever is calling the shots, the crisis committee or sundalo o police na i-converge lahat ng ito. Sapagkat there are those who have switched off from the political insecurity to relief kasi ito mas nakakapwelo, nakakabelo. So, what we're saying now is, if that's the hope, even at the level of government, dapat mag-aral nito kasi I'm sorry, but there are generals who come there telling. I mean, not consulting, but telling. Ano yung ginawa nyo? Ganito ang ginagawa namin sa Metro Manila. Eh, we don't outan siya. May mga dynamics na ganyan eh. Kasi we struggle with how to handle this. And as I said, maybe there's no practice in how to handle this. We try as best as we can, to the extent that we can, but we should assume responsibility for the consequences that come out of these approaches.
Professor Ed.
The situation in Zamboanga right now is actually deteriorated. It's gone from bad to worse as far as the government's position is concerned. Mayor Ben Climaco, who is a party mate of President Aquino, and had earlier been very supportive of what the national government had been doing to resolve the crisis in Zamboanga, has now actually changed her tune. In today's Inquirer, page A19, she's quoted as saying this, and I quote, "Because of the incompetence of OPA to reach out to the MNLF and the two leaders and their ideologies, the entire people are suffering. We are all victims here. Despite numerous appeals to OPA to go to Sulu and address the problem of Nur Miswari, OPA did not listen. end of quote. So I texted Meg to ask her to confirm this particular item, and this is her reply. Well, she says, not in my exact words, but OPAC is not in Zamboanga City, when in fact this problem stems from the failed peace talks. And I'm not translating from Chabacano. She's asking, where are they in the crisis? They are there in Manila because of the defense, to defend the budget. So she's saying, so apparently it's more important for them than the problem that is taking place now in Zamboanga. So the local government in Zamboanga City now feels that they have been also shut off from the efforts to find a solution to what is going on in Zamboanga. The other thing is, I came across this speech by Secretary Dedes, August 9, 2013, which is just 1 month before the crisis started in Zamboanga. She delivered a speech on peace building in Mindanao, in Davao City, for the Mindanao Business Conference. It's a very long speech. It's all about the peace building process in Mindanao, and all she mentions is the MILF. Nothing else. She doesn't mention any other initiatives that OPAC has been taking, so far as the other parties are concerned. No mention of the MNLF, no mention of the other groups. It's all about the MILF. Bangsamoro peace agreement. So from the words, from the horse's mouth alone, excuse me for saying that, it appears that as late as 1 month before the Zamboanga standoff started, OPAC was just thinking exclusively about the MILF and not about any of the other groups.
Okay, yes, Ms. Grace.
One of the structures that have been created in relation to the filed annexes and the roadmap is a tripartite monitoring team to monitor, to look at the development of all these things in relation to even the creation of the basic Bangsamoro law. In that meeting, one question I asked was, how are you able to set up your mechanisms for monitoring so that you're able to hear the signals rather than the noise? Because you're focused on the MILF, but your terms of reference talk about all agreements. And so, if it is the MILF, how then would you frame the approach to monitoring such that you're able to accommodate emerging events like the dynamics in Zamboanga, which has gone full blast, to affect the way the peace process is carried on? Well, because the MILF peace process is not something that is carried on in a vacuum, and that the MILF do not live in a vacuum in the same way as the MNLF do not live in a vacuum. We're all in this together, and you cannot talk about a pure situation, such as a black or a white situation. It's all very checkered now.
Yes, Secretary.
I just need to respond to some of the points that Ed raised. First, about the speech. We don't know the context of the speech. Maybe the ones who had invited her to deliver the speech wanted to focus on the MILF process. So just because there is no reference in a particular speech, and by the way, Secretary Dedes is invited to so many events to speak on different aspects of the peace process. Just because one speech delivered 1 month before the event about Mindanao did not mention the table with the MNLF, does not mean that OPAC exclusively thinks of the Mindanao problem as only being with the MILF. In fact, again, I'm not from OPAC, but I work very closely with OPAC. My understanding is the structure, the way the OPAC itself is organized. You have Secretary Dedes on top of all of the peace tables, and then you have 3 undersecretaries. that report directly to her. One is an undersecretary in charge of all tables relating to the CPP-NPA conflict, meaning not just with the CPP-NPA but also the splinter groups that have separate peace agreements with the government, the RPA, ABP, CPLA. So there's one undersecretary in charge of that. There is another Undersecretary Joel Lorena, who is in charge of all aspects involving the Moro question. And he is in charge of both the panel that is negotiating with the MILF as well as the tripartite review process. And Joel Lorena actually was former MNLF who had been on the secretariat of the negotiations leading up to the 1996 peace agreement. And my understanding, and I think this is part of the materials that OPAP has brought here, is since the crisis has occurred in Zamboanga, Undersecretary Lorena has been coordinating with the Crisis Management Committee on the ground and has been going to Zamboanga and to Sulu to talk with the different MNLF groups. I don't know if he has been successful in reaching out to Nur Miswari himself or to Ustad Malik, but there is engagement of OPAP on the ground. But obviously, crisis management has different aspects, dealing with the security situation, dealing with the evacuees, coordinating all of the efforts, and OPAP's role is not on top of that. But you know, I cannot deny whatever Beck feels. If she feels OPAP is not present on the ground, that is her feeling, but my understanding is OPAP has deployed some people on the ground, both in Zamboanga and in Sulu. So just to clarify that, I have heard Secretary Teres herself attend to many issues involving the MNLF, and just so you know, her approach is this. There are currently 2 negotiating tables with constituted panels, one with the CPP-NPA and one with the MILF. And she defers to the leadership of the panel chairs of those respective tables. With the MNLF, it is Secretary Teres herself who sits on that table. All the other what we refer to as completion or closure tables, those that have agreements but are in the process of implementation, dispute settlement, etc. All those tables not involving active negotiation towards a political settlement. Involving a political settlement has already been arrived at, but there are problems of implementation. Those tables, Secretary Teres herself sits. So every single tripartite review meeting that has been held under the auspices of the OIC, Secretary Teres has been on top of that. So just for the record.
Okay, we have room for a few more questions. Are there, yes, quick question, please. Oh yes, and then it will be next.
Veronica,
yeah.
I'm Veronica with Interaction. Malaysia has been mentioned in the discussion earlier.
Okay.
I would just like, and I'd like to point out also that the trial of the supporters of the Sultan of Sulu is ongoing now in Malaysia. Has the government taken into account the other possibilities if the trial will result in a conviction of the conviction of these people in Malaysia?
Quick question. Secretary, you wanna take that?
Napakahirap ng mga
Oo nga, hindi na kayo magtanong.
Ang understanding ko, yung issue, of course, that will have to take its own course. This involves, of course, intrusions. I guess similar to an intrusion into Zamboanga, which will, after this is resolved, there will have to be investigation and possible prosecutions. Same breath, intrusions into the Haddad will have reached the point where there are criminal proceedings. My understanding is the Philippine Embassy in Malaysia has been working with all the Filipinos that that are involved, and they have also engaged legal support to provide legal assistance to those that are facing prosecution. That is the extent of all the support we are providing and coordinating, of course, with the Malaysian government for purposes of protection of Filipino civilians that may be affected by sentiments on the ground as a result of the intrusions into Sabah. Now your question is, have we taken into account what the implications will be should convictions arise? That's a question of fact that I might have no knowledge of, but I would believe if there is complete staff work, that should be taken into account. The concerns of the MNLF, all of the groups of the MNLF, the concerns of the relatives and descendants of the Sultan have to be attended to, and certainly the concerns of the families as well as the communities of those that are facing prosecution should be taken into account. So, but whether or not that is actually happening is something I am not privy to at this time. So, but thank you for raising it, and I will of course remind them that this should be taken into account, although I presume that that is the case.
All right, we have another question. Yes, please. Tapos, last question, sir. Siya muna, then ikaw. Quick question sa'yo.
Good afternoon po. Estudyante po ako dito. Tanong ko lang po, are we talking with the right people? Kumbaga? Kasi in the first place, if we're talking with the right people, why is this thing happen? It means that the MILF is not the representative of this area. So, before this happened kasi, meron ng balita na the Sultanate of Sulu and the MNLF faction of Mindanao was ignored, and you answered that already. So, what I'm saying is that, are we really talking with the right people? Kasi this itself prove na we're not, because the next question is, ma'am, do we have a document or a paper trail that supporting the MILF leadership, like from the NGO, civil societies, the business group, na, okay, MILF is our representative, and since they are the one who is going to sign the framework agreement, do we have that? Na meron pa tayong paper din na we're throwing our support to the MILF leadership. Thank you.
Secretary ko.
Undersecretary lang po.
Sa amin,
Chito lang, nasa UP naman po tayo.
Oversecretary.
First, the premise is that we're negotiating with the MILF as representing the entirety of the Moro. And the answer is no, we are negotiating with the MILF. Okay? So we do not assume when we are negotiating with the MILF that the MILF represents the MNLF. Because in fact, the MNLF is a separate, distinct political group to the MILF. So the question is, are you talking to the right people? The answer is the government will talk with all stakeholders on the Moro question. There is one table with the MILF negotiating because that is the current rebel group that we have not signed a peace agreement with. But we have direct lines with the MNLF also. And when we talk to the MNLF, we talk to all of the factions in the MNLF, including Mr. Miswari. He had in fact attended several tripartite review, and the lecture mode that was described earlier, that he sometimes gets into, actually not quite intimidating, just like any UP professor, very intimidating, very interesting.
He has not intimidated you now.
No, I have been fortunate to have sat through those discussions with him, and I will confirm what Eduardo said earlier. In non-battle mode, he appears to be meek as a sheep, but of course now he appears to be in battle mode. So I have never seen him or encountered him in that context. Just to respond, we need to resolve the fundamental problems in Mindanao. Some of the things that Ed spoke about, okay, we all of the, some and all of the things that Ed talked about that need to be resolved. And it's not just with the rebel forces. Ultimately, a consensus must be achieved for the Bangsamoro area, but also for the area beyond the Bangsamoro that's in Mindanao, that will resolve the long-standing conflict drivers. And so when while it appears to be compartmentalized, negotiations with the MILF, tripartite with the MNLF, all of that, the whole of government approach will have to involve these several initiatives feeding into one process. And now with the Zamboanga Crisis, resolving the Zamboanga Crisis, rehabilitating Zamboanga post-crisis situation, will need to be fed into the issue of dealing with the whole Mindanao problem, Mindanao question. So that's just my quick answer to you. We approach our negotiations in good faith with all stakeholders, rebel groups or not, who are prepared to work with us in resolving the issues. Now, I think the situation has been, because the MNLF is not part of the negotiations with the MILF, there may be apprehensions or interpretations, etc., that whatever has been achieved by the final peace agreement of 1996 will be for naught in the current negotiations with the MILF. That will not be the case. As I said, at a certain point after the negotiations are completed, when we talk about the Bangsamoro Basic Law, the input from the tripartite review, the input from the MILF process, the armed governance reform, will all contribute to the formulation of the Bangsamoro Basic Law and the preparation for the plebiscite whenever that happens. Of course, I think what Dean Wadi said about trying to force 100 years of a problem into the next 3 years, well, I take it well. But, the Aquino government is only until 2016, so we're trying our level best to try and complete whatever we can complete under this administration, because actually President Aquino wants to sign a peace deal that he can implement. We cannot guarantee what the next administration will do, so we're prepared to work with all stakeholders to implement what is possible for peace, for development, for equality in Mindanao while we are still in administration.
Just a follow-up.
Which means earlier deadline for the framework agreement. We
are hoping, when the framework agreement was signed October last year, the annexes were supposed, according to the framework agreement, should have been completed by the end of the year. That was the term. But it took a little longer, and we only finished 2 of the 4 annexes. But nonetheless, I think it's important that we went through that process because things are being clarified, and issues are being tabled so that walang sorpresa. I think that's one of the learnings we have in this process with the MILF. Things that were left unsaid and things that were kept undone with the MNLF are being tabled now, so that, like for example, as I said, normalization. We will deal with that issue here. Unlike the FPA, other than reintegration of some MNLF forces, the issue has been left unaddressed.
Sabihin mo lang follow up mo and then we call it the next...
Sir, we will have an agreement with the MILF, tapos mapipirmahan, right? And then afterwards, we're not talking of a different place, right? So parang if this particular group wants this and then another group wants it and they're only talking of the similar place, then don't you think that your premise is self-defeating? Thank you, sir.
Next
Sige, I'll take the next question, but I'll also
next
respond.
question, tapos respond. Yes, please. Name and
Sir, good morning. Ron Pelonson from Kyoto News, Japanese News Agency.
Just a clarification on the convergence, sir. So, after the termination of negotiations with MNLF, you said there will be continuing engagements with them, the 42 consensus points. Will this continuation be under the context of the Bangsamoro political entity? Because we will be phasing out the ARMM. So is this a convergence that we're talking about? And is this acceptable, do you think, to Ms. Wari, such that you will not engage again in another upheaval in Zamboanga?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, we have to be careful with our language. No? There is no negotiation with the MNLF as far as the Philippine government is concerned. That occurred in the 1990s, and we have a final agreement. Right? What we are doing is a regular process of governance. You know, how far has the agreement been implemented? What still needs to be pursued? But I again take Dean Wali's proposals well. He said, you know, we need to be a little more flexible. We need to be a little less legalistic about it. And I guess we need to find a way by which to deal with the MNLF problem, the MNLF concerns, in the context of post-FPA. We cannot, of course, deny that there is a FPA, a final peace agreement with them. But if they are unhappy with that, how might we resolve it? But our position is, we do not resolve it by resorting to violence. But they have. Yet the 42 consensus points is a set of documents. They have not yet been adopted under the OIC process, because what happened was hindi pa nakapag-meeting to finalize. That's why we are proposing, let's complete the set of review, terminate the review, and adopt the resolutions from the review. And part of that is the 42 consensus points. These are actually just, it's a list of things like this provision in the FPA has not yet been implemented, it should be undertaken. This provision of the armed law needs to be amended. This provision of the armed law has never been implemented. Those are the things that are found in the 42 consensus points. Now, obviously, as we are speaking about the same territory and the same people, there cannot be two separate entities. An arm under the 9054, which was established from the FPA, and the Bangsamoro, which will be the new entity that will be established after we complete the negotiations with the MNLF. That's why we speak of convergence. And the time for convergence is, it's already ongoing now. We're looking for ways and means to work with all stakeholders. It's not as if the MNLF has not been engaging with the government. As I mentioned, many MNLF leaders have actually been part of the OIC government of Mujib Hataman and continue to serve with Mujib Hataman in the armed government that was elected last May. But that convergence will take new forms when we finish the negotiations with the MILF, because we will move to preparing for the Bangsamoro. So to answer your question, yes, because it involves one people in one area, we are working towards inclusivity of all stakeholders. MNLF, MILF, all other persons of goodwill, whether Christian, Luman, or Muslim in the area, to help us with a new governance institution that will hopefully address the core problems in the area. Having said that, we are also very much aware that there are other forces other than the MNLF and the MILF that we do not have negotiations with at this time. Abu Sayyaf Group, there is reports of a new military group called Khalifa Islamia, and the BIFF, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters. We need to address them, but right now, that is being addressed as a security issue, as a security problem by the police and the armed forces. Our hope is with the peace process involving both the MILF and the MNLF and the people in the area, with peace and development investments occurring on the ground, then the cause or the basis upon which other rebel forces are organizing might be lost, and ultimately they can be contained, isolated, and ultimately over time resolved. That's our hope. Now, if that doesn't happen, let's say you have a Bangsamoro, the BIFF becomes a new rebel group, then we deal with that problem ultimately when we get to that bridge.
Okay, we can give, I think, Dr. Grig's final words so that we come back to Zamboanga and hear the people from ground exactly what we can do. I think the questions I think Dr. Grace you would respond to is, okay, ano po yung scenarios for closing or doing perhaps the best effort or the best case scenario that we can aspire to achieve in Zamboanga? And I think backstory niya, saan ba talaga nagkamali? Ano yung pwedeng improvement sana the way this breaks out again dun sa mga areas na sinasabi meron pang ibang factions? What has gone wrong? Where could we improve the way we handle a crisis like this? And what can Filipinos, even outside Zamboanga, do to come to a closure scenario that would be best for everyone?
Ang problema is that there's a natural sociological ano ba, na may in-group tayo, may out-group tayo, etc. And because we are dividing the way we look at things this way, in terms of the in-group and the out-group, I think that's the challenge to our inclusivity, because we fail to see how the MNLF is also ours. And whatever happens from sakit sa kalingkingan, daman ng buong katawan. And that principle is something which we're now seeing. Now, there's certain things that we took for granted. We went through a peace process where the building blocks of it may have been laid in place but not well implemented, or may not have been implemented, and so we have continued talks that the tripartite review. So what we're now saying is, the lamentations of Ben Climaco, for example, are very natural for a new city mayor who has had her baptism of fire and doesn't quite know what to do. Because as I said, nobody has had practice on this before. But again, if we take stock in what we have, for example, I guess this crisis has taught us many lessons. Many lessons where we should not divide ourselves, them and us, victims and enemies and all that. That would be one area. The second is lessons we see along the way. Lessons of culture, lessons of history, and lessons of respect for every sector and every individual here. And of course, the usual human rights, IHL, and rule of law things. When we speak about safe conduct passes, we're not talking about glossing over accountability or glossing over issues of justice, because people really have to take responsibility for the offenses that they've made. I guess that's why we will harp on the rule of law thing, because that's something that has to be focused on. On the other hand, let's be clear, when we're faced with dilemmas, like the primacy of life, no matter if it's only one life, because we've been hearing stories in Zamboanga like, collateral damage pa ang hostages versus kasi nandun sa grandstand yung 100,000 what is the hostages compared to the thousands of pero hindi yun walang comparison yan. Of course, if you have helpful figures, maybe that's a comparison enough, but one life, as in one life, even an MNLF life. So what we're saying now is, I guess we have to maximize on the values that are given to us now by this kind of a situation, where we see and respect the journey of each group of people, Muslim, whether we say Miswaris clan, MILF, etc., etc. Mindanao has long been torn. And if this is a positive effect of the war or the siege of Zamboanga, is this a way where we can come together? Because one of the things that are mentioned now would be healing. But where will that begin when we're so much in pain? How do you heal the healers also who are also very stretched out now, strained? I just received a text message saying, I have a 50-50, I'm making a 50-50 on whether I should go or not. I'm leaving my children home, but I need to deal with relief work, I need to blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, the text messages now talking about parang sabil. Parang sabil is a house of tradition, where it's now saying, I wouldn't want to call it go full broke, but maybe it's really moving now to the finish. And how culturally we're dealing with the finish and the possibility that this remaining group of MNLFs who are holding out to the last will be labeled by the Muslim community as martyrs, or heroes. And when that is the label, there's no telling what sympathy actions can happen. So that what we want to write Phillies to and post-mortem and all that will never be done.
On that very somber note, I think we all have to focus on Zamboanga. We might have been fighting just a battle in Zamboanga, but it seems from all the panelist presentations that the real war remains very much the business of all Filipinos in the Philippines. There have been some angry words, and I think a lot of words of concern also for Zamboanga. But perhaps everybody should take heed and review the lessons, look at the neglected areas of the conversation. We'd like to thank everyone who participated in this forum, especially our panelists, of course, Undersecretary Chito Gascon, Professor Grace Rebollos, and Professor Julkipli Wadi, and Professor Ed Tadem. The organizers, in particular, we'd like to mention special thanks to the UP Asian Center, the UP Institute of Islamic Studies, the UP Third World Studies Center, and the Initiatives for International Dialogue. Meron pong sign-up board, yung petition for the President, the government, to heed the call for a humanitarian ceasefire and dialogue in Zamboanga. The URL or website address is iid.manila@gmail.com. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat. This has been the Forum on Zamboanga Crisis, Causes and Implications. Good day, everyone.